Hi and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. In this episode we're going to be talking to Sian Hill, who we've previously spoken to about the polyvagal system. We're going to be following on from that and looking at what you do once you've reduced demands. How do you then progress when things haven't improved? Hi everyone and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. And before I go on any further, I would like you to go hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell so that you know when new content's coming up. And it makes a huge difference just to how the algorithms respond and how this all gets out there and the people who get to see it. So you've been doing me a massive favour. Please do go do that right now. In this episode, you may recall a while back, we spoke to Sian Hill. And Sian is a specialist in neurodiversity. And we were looking at the polyvagal system. And from that, there's been a lot of responses. And Sian got in touch and said, look, I'd really like to do a follow-up. So first of all, let's welcome Sian. How are you, Sian?
I'm great, thank you. And thank you for inviting me back onto the show. It's a real pleasure and honour to share time and space with you again.
Likewise. I don't get that often. So yeah, look, you got in touch with me and you said that you've been getting a lot of response to our initial video that we've done from people that you're in touch with. What was the responses you were getting?
The responses were interesting, but they weren't unexpected. The responses tended to centre around, number one, thank you for having this conversation. It's so important. And I got so much benefit from it. So thank you for hosting the conversation in the first place. The responses echo conversations that I have and that I see and hear about within the PDA communities and in social media all of the time, and I have for quite a considerable amount of time now. And they centre around, firstly, look, I'm reducing demands. What do I do next? No one kind of tells you what to do next. Most strategies are focused on low demand lifestyles and things, but I kind of feel like there's something missing. I kind of feel like there's something I need to do, but no one's telling me what that is.
It's so interesting because I actually had a conversation yesterday specifically on this, that somebody was like, with Christmas and everything and schools going back and just a lot going on for the particular household on top of that, and the stress it was bringing was especially PDA. And they were saying that, you know, it's like, I feel like I've reduced every demand. I don't know how much further I can take it, and I don't know what's next. Exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. That leads beautifully into the second response that I've been seeing and hearing and I've been getting as well. And that's around, we run a low demand household. I reduce demands as much as I possibly can, and things are getting worse. Or the other variation of that story is, I've done this and things are unbearable. I don't know what else to do because I can't reduce things that are going on in our house any more than I currently am. What am I supposed to do? And those two conversations are completely connected. They're just on opposite ends. They're along the same line, but just different variations of it. So the first one of look, I kind of feel like there's something else or there's something missing, but I don't know what to do and no one's talking about that. That's kind of the introductory part of that range, if you like. And then the complete other end of that is I don't know what to do anymore. I can't take any more. This is becoming unbearable. I want to support my child, myself, my family, and I just don't know what to do. And like, I know that you know, and like I personally know as well, like, so, and I know it's going to resonate with so many people listening as well, is that when we go to, or we find ourselves in that place of, I can't take this anymore, I don't know what to do, it's really difficult. And the reason it's really difficult is because physiologically and biologically, which is going to connect us back to our last chat that we had now, we look at the nervous system and polyvagal theories, and this would be a little kind of a nice recap for people that haven't caught that one yet. And if you haven't caught it yet, I'd suggest go watch that first.
Come back in the description.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So we've got three core physiological and autonomic states in our body that drive the ways we look at everything, the ways we relate to everything, the ways we respond to everything, our behaviour, everything in our lives. The social engagement state, the sympathetic state, which a lot of people will know of as fight-flight, and the shutdown state, which is where freeze lives. And it's also a lot more complex than just freeze, but we'll just keep it as that for a moment because it makes it a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah.
And both of these states work in two ways. So they work at ease when there's safety, and they work under threat when the body is under stress, when it detects cues of danger or it detects cues of life threat in both our bodies and the environment around us, which includes the people around us. Now, what happens is there's a hierarchical system, and as you move through and down the state, so you've got, if you kind of look at it as you've got social engagement at the top, then you've got sympathetic underneath it, and then you've got the shutdown, which is the dorsal vagal, the oldest and most primitive part of our nervous system at the bottom. As you move down, it becomes more and more about survival, and you have less choices, and you have less opportunities for engagement available to you. Everything is about survival. Now, what happens is when you're in that shutdown dorsal vagal state, it's a very metaphorically cold and dark and dismal place where you have no choices. But when we drop into that shutdown place, we naturally feel like we cannot do anything. We're immobilized. And basically the narrative in our body is the world is going to end and I'm going to die. The first 3 years of our lives shape everything in our lives. It shapes the ways that we learn to live in our bodies, the ways our nervous system is wired to respond to stress, and it shapes the ways that we relate to the world, ourselves, and our experiences. Now, early trauma, that includes in utero, before we're even born, while we're germinating in the womb, that shapes our nervous system for danger instead of for safety. So what happens is that if we've got a history of unresolved early trauma, which the reality, the harsh reality is that that is true for the vast majority, if not all, parents in our Western world, because of generations that have come before us, not having a nuanced enough understanding of trauma and healing until recent times, and also because of the changes in the way that we now live socially in our world. Like most of us as parents are very acutely aware of the fact that we're parenting in a paradigm world and a paradoxical world where we have less resources available to support us so we can support our children than any generation has ever had before us. And that makes life as a whole, but especially parenting, incredibly challenging, and it asks us to be more flexible and adaptive than ever before, and trauma impacts our ability to do that. So what happens is that when we have a history of unresolved early trauma and we have a nervous system that's wired for danger, not for safety, and being able to move through and away from danger and life threats easily and in most cases effortlessly, then what happens is that when we drop into that place of I can't do this anymore, it activates and reactivates those early patterns and shame within us, because that dorsal vagal part of our nervous system, that part of our body, is where shame lives. And early trauma, just because of the nature and the nuances of it, it creates an internal working model that's built on a foundation of toxic shame. And we can get stuck in those cycles of, this is my fault, I'm to blame, I'm such a shit parent, or even as a protective mechanism for that, when we come up to sympathetic, to protect that vulnerability, we blame outside of us. So we might find ourselves, and this is so often the case actually when parents find me, and I see in the world as well, where we go, it's my child's fault. It's if only they hadn't said and done this, then everything would have been okay. And that's that's not our fault, and it's not our child's fault, and it's not anybody's fault. We need to move away from this whole blame and shame mechanism and just recognise that our body is protecting us in the best and only way it can, based on the ways it's needed to adapt in order to survive us in the past.
It's interesting because I think that whole blame thing comes out of, it's a societal thing. And I think it's due to the way legal systems now work, that someone always has to be to blame. We live in a blame culture. We look for wrong, not what's wrong. And we need to get back to what's wrong, because always looking for a person to blame is creating so many more issues. And if we actually look for what's wrong, we can then get to the solution of the problem and move to
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, if we look physiologically and biologically at what blame is, it's what I and colleagues of mine in the trauma world refer to as sitting above a shame shield. It's like there's a shield that you metaphorically create physiologically in your body to protect you from feeling and being immersed in and consumed by that shame. Blame is one of those survival strategies to protect us from, number one, experiencing that vulnerability and being in that shutdown place. So blame is one of those protective mechanisms, protective survival mechanisms, that first and foremost is protecting our vulnerability and protecting us from feeling all this horrible, dark and dismal stuff. But because it comes from a place of disconnection, because it comes from that freeze place, from that overwhelm, from that place of I've got no choice, it does so by looking outside of yourself for the solutions that only inside you are going to bring. And again, this is something that's perpetuated by early trauma. But what it also does is, by projecting it onto somebody else, it takes away your responsibility and ability to do anything about that. It brings a possibility of you feeling safer and feeling that you belong, because it's not about you and it's all shame driven.
We talked so much about how trauma influences and what it does to us and how that affects who we are now. And we understand, and it's an innate thing with PDA, and I think with autism and neurodiversity in general, is that need to reduce demands, because it makes life that much more simple for the kids that we're raising and the people that are in our lives. But, and it's something I've experienced myself, you get to that point where you've reduced demands, but still you're facing these very challenging behaviours. And, there's a risk. So for my family, when my daughter's in that state, she's very violent. And we have to be really on it. But how do you get to, so what happens after you've reduced the demands and you still feel like you're stuck in that place where, you don't feel like there's been progress? What is the next stage?
It's a great question as well. When you are doing all these things that other people in similar situations are telling you to do and giving you guidance over, which is great, helps you get started and understand things, you then end up in that shutdown place, that dorsal vagal place of, but I've done everything I can, I can't do any more, I have no more choices. Yeah. And that in itself then puts you physiologically into that life threat place of I can't go anywhere. And then when there's been early trauma, then that bubbles up there, and I bet you've been there, I'll pretty much guarantee it, because most parents in our Western world have been there. It takes you to that place of I'm a shit parent, not giving my child what they need.
That was called, maybe I am just a really bad parent.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Rationalising through why I'm not, but why that feeling. And it's something that comes, like the group I run on Facebook, it's something that comes up a lot. People would say I feel like a total failure as a parent, and the first thing they do is blame themselves. And
it's because physiologically we're in a state in our body that is supporting and driving that narrative. So in other words, we're in a shutdown dorsal vagal state, which is that place of darkness and life threat There's no hope. Everything is dark and there's no way out.
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's that sense of I've done everything I can.
I can't do any more.
I can't do any more. I'm not getting anywhere. And that's that shutdown, which is it's basically what I would term as I'm just giving up.
Exactly. And then the second thing that happens alongside and at the same time as it is that it's not just about our physiology in the moment, it's also about what's still living in our body and has been held in our body from the past. The reason we go to that shame place from that shutdown place is because that's the early wiring from early childhood, from early trauma, that's taught us that the world's a dangerous place and that we're bad and it's all our fault. That shame lives physiologically in that shutdown place. But what it means is that in our early childhood, if we went there, that's how because we are wired for attachment and we're dependent on caregivers when we come into this world and for years of our lives, because human beings take so long to take longer to develop than any other species. If we look outside ourselves to what's actually going on, which we don't actually have the ability to make sense of as little ones anyway, but if I was to look out and go, oh, well, it's because my mother doesn't feel unsafe, doesn't feel safe at the moment, it's her experiences being projected onto me, that's not about me at all. We don't have the ability to do that. Plus, we're also dependent on those caregivers for our survival. So what happens is little ones internalize that experience and they make sense of what's happening and not being able to resolve experiences and move through those survival responses from a place of, it's because there's something wrong with me. It's because I'm bad. And that then lives within us for the rest of our lives, driving the ways that we relate to and look at and navigate everything until we learn about this stuff and then we start rebuilding, and for many of us, building for the first time that true sense of safety and belonging within us that we may never have had in our early environments and relationships.
To take what you just said there, so we've got this blame thing on ourselves, to take that into the situation, how do we avoid passing that on?
This is another great question. Trauma passes on in 3 ways to our children. And this is probably one of the most widely misunderstood and unknown things, these 3 ways within the whole of parenting. And it deeply saddens and also frustrates the shit out of me because it keeps people stuck through no fault of their own. There is this misconception that the only ways we pass on trauma to our children, to other people, is through the ways that we're interacting with them, through our parenting. And while we absolutely do and can pass things on through those ways, that's just one of 3 ways that we do. So the first way is how our past experiences and traumas get passed down at a cellular level to our children and our grandchildren when our children are conceived. In other words, they've experienced trauma before they were even conceived, essentially. And that's widely unknown within the parenting world. There are so many people now doing wonderful, amazing jobs of trying to break cycles to stop things being passed down. And there's also this huge fear about, because I don't want my children to experience trauma. And actually, if we understand that they've already experienced trauma, we can give ourselves a big bloody break and take away that fear and that shame-driven thing of I can't pass on to my children what I experienced, knowing that that already has happened, because it happens at a cellular level. We can't control that. And actually that helps us have so much more compassion for ourselves and again move out of this blame, shame lens and narrative. We're all doing the best we can with what we've got, what we've been given and what's been passed down to us. And we get to choose where we go from here. We get to choose how we show up in the world from here, from today. We get to take responsibility for our futures and our lives and our children's in ways that our parents and grandparents never were able to, because they didn't have the science and the tools and the practices that we now do, that have only really emerged in recent years. You could look at it from this very dark and dismal place. And if you do, we can recognize that that's from a a shutdown story. That's a narrative there, and actually we can shift that story, and doing so will help shift our state over there. We're doing the best that we can. We can't change what's come before us. We can't change where we are, and we can choose where we go from here. And first and foremost, it does come down to understanding how the human body actually flipping works and develops at a nervous system level, because that's where everything begins and ends.
So that's the end of part one of this conversation. There is going to be another part coming up in a few days' time. I'm just going to edit that together separately. We've looked at the theory behind what this trauma does to how we relate to the situations when we're stuck and we feel we've done everything we can and we can't move on from that. And we've looked at the theory, I guess, behind that. What we'll be looking at in the next episode, which will be up, as I say, in a few days, will be how we can put that into practice, what the practical steps that we can do are to break this cycle. Thanks so much for joining me. If you could do me a real favour, you could hop on now, just hit like on this, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you know when new content's coming up. It does make a huge difference to how this message gets out there and the people that get to see this. It makes a big difference with the YouTube algorithms. Please do go do that now. I will see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, stay safe.